There is a lot of wonderful history in West Tennessee, and every year Bolivar rolls out the welcome mat for its annual home tour. The tour is conducted by APTA, the Association for the Preservation of Tennessee Antiquities. The tour raises funds for the upkeep of association properties. Our tour guide this year was Jimmy Stevens.
Well, we're showing the south side of Bolivar right here. Bolivar has 119 buildings on the National Register. The house was erected by John Murray, who was a land speculator. It was bought by Catherine Lee in 1828 and then was purchased by Mr. Bills in 1838. And Mr. Bills started about aggrandizing the house and adding to it. And so it's grown like Topsy over the years right here. Mr. Bills was also the financial advisor to President Polk, who was his wife's first cousin. If you notice, it's the first Greek revival house that was established here in Bolivar with classical orders. Before that, the house faced the back. The city street came into the back of the house, so they changed the direction of the house. And Mr. Bills made it Greek revival, and he put the columns in here. And they weren't sure about how they went in, so they're upside down if you look at the portico. And the house was to have another two-story wing on the south side. Mr. Bill's wife died, he lost interest, the wall was torn off on the south. They added 4 feet to the 2 bedrooms on the south side, walled it back up, and never erected the two-story wing on the south. And if you notice, they laid out the grounds long before the houses were built. The walk goes to the middle of a house. If you have wings on it, there are too many columns that were ordered, so they have 2 in the center rather than spaced out all the way down. And if they were having had the wing, they would be equally spaced all the way across the front. David Crockett and Adam Huntsman were running for Congress. During this time, the Pillars was owned by John and Catherine Lee. And Mr. Lee was former editor of the Saturday Evening Post and moved to Bolivar and established a newspaper. And apparently Crockett and Huntsman were staying with the Lees. And during the middle of the night, Crockett went to Mr. Lee's daughter's room and she screamed, and he took a wooden leg that belonged to Adam Huntsman and banged it on the floor. Mr. Lee ordered Huntsman out of the house and through his support for Crockett, and this is how Crockett ended up being elected to Congress. At that period of time, everybody in Bolivar thought that they needed a Swedish cook. So they brought them over here to cook their food. Beneath the cook's room is what they call the dairy. That's where they kept the cisterns that they kept the water in to keep the milks and all this cool. When the food was cooked, it was brought from the kitchen through this set of doors underneath the house and was carried to the north side to the original dining room, up the staircase. People at that time thought that the odor of food caused illness, so they wanted to be as far away from the smell of food as they could until they ate the food. This house was started in 1858. And it was built by E.P. Ezekiel Polk McNeel and his wife Ann Williams McNeel. And it was Sloan out of Philadelphia is thought to be the architect of the house. He was a leading architect in America at the time. And the McNeil's only daughter, Priscilla, died of cholera in coming home on a steamboat from Philadelphia. And this was to take Mrs. McNeel's attention away from the loss of her daughter. She wanted it built as close to Polk Cemetery as possible where her daughter was buried. The house was finished 2 or 3 months after the Civil War started. Mr. McNeel got passes for 30 Italians who were finishing up the interior of the house right there. Safety conduct passes to get back out and get the house finished.
And if you'll notice over the stairway, there's a white spot there. And the caretaker, Willis Smart, swears that that spot came there the day Irene McDonald died. And it's a good story, and really, it's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
During the war, it was occupied by federal troops. Ms. McNeel was allowed one room in the house to live in. And of course, this saved a lot of homes in Bolivar because Bolivar was burned in March of 1864. And the houses that were occupied by the Union officers were not destroyed. The ones, people who had signed the oath of allegiance, believe it or not, were burned. These were the original vegetables and flower gardens. What you see here are the flower part. The vegetable part's been planted in an orchard. You have the gazebo. You also, on the south side, have the slave quarters. One of the slave quarters burned. You have a little octagonal building, which was the laundry, and then a tall square building, which is the smokehouse, and then behind that, the children's playhouse. But all this exists. The peonies were brought over here by Ambassador Wright, who was the first American ambassador to Japan. This cemetery was started by the Polk family. In the 1840s, there was a schism in Bolivar, and everyone decided that they couldn't be buried together in the same ground. So the Polk family came down here, and other people from Virginia settled at the old town cemetery called Union Cemetery. The Polk's founder here in Bolivar was Ezekiel Polk, who was the grandfather of President James Knox Polk. He came here in 1819 and died, and the family, his descendants, are still buried in this cemetery today. One lady said it was, in Town and Country magazine, said it was much easier to get to heaven than it was to be buried in Polk Cemetery. This church was built over the original St. James Church, which had been badly damaged during the Civil War right here. And it was done by, the architect was Fletcher Sloan, who was a brother of Sam Sloan of Philadelphia, the leading architect of America at that time. And after the church was built, the ceiling was put up. The ceiling is a hammer beam ceiling, and at the time it was put in here, was the largest hammer beam ceiling in the state. The church was then demolished, and the floor was put in, and the pews, and the people were then able to worship in here. Wood home next door caught on fire, and the church, the water department here in town, was able to keep water on the roof of the church, but they couldn't keep it on the steeple. The steeple, they all had wooden shingles. The steeple caught on fire, and there was a circus in town at the time, and the acrobats climbed up on the steeple, tied ropes to it, and got elephants, and they pulled the burning steeple off the church and saved the church. And then it was replaced, and during the painting being replaced with metal, a man painting it fell off, and some sheep had gotten out of a pen and were grazing by the church, and the man fell on the sheep, killed the sheep, but saved his life. This house is being restored based on the original colors and trying to reproduce. Everything in here belonged to the Ingram family. It was originally built by Thomas Smith in 1860, and the Civil War came along and work stopped on the inside of the house and was never finished, the moldings, the plasterwork, and all this stuff, and it was put back in by George T. Ingram, and this was the Ingram sitting room right here. And Miss Elizabeth Ingram left this house to a foundation, and for maintenance and upkeep, the colors are original to the room. Furniture is original to what the Ingram family had in here. Well, this is the Association for the Preservation of Tennessee Antiquities. And it was started to save Belmead Plantation in Nashville. It's expanded. There are sites all over Tennessee right now. This Bolivar having 2 for a small town, Memphis has 2, and it's an organization to preserve historic sites in Tennessee.